Yeah? Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee on the 7th of February at 6 p.m. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to go through some housekeeping with you. May I remind everyone present that this hybrid meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. If a participant wishes to speak, can they please raise their hand in person if sat in the chamber, or use the remote raise hand function located in the bottom left-hand side of the screen. This will put you in the speaker queue accordingly. When subsequently invited to address by myself, please then press your activation button in the bottom centre of your screen. Please be patient and aware that there will be a small time lag and that you do not need to press the button again. The response of the system is not instant. If the button or desk microphone changes to the red, then it has responded. If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to address by myself, please could they turn their camera on to indicate or place a message in the chat function. When invited to address by myself, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this is not possible for any reason, please bring this to the attention of myself and or the Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. Once you have participated, please remember to turn your activation button off so as not to delay other participants from coming onto screen and to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and or to grab the attention of myself or the Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let myself or the Democratic Services Officer know. If a remote committee member has a prejudicial interest and is therefore required to withdraw from the meeting, the Democratic Services Officer will place the participant in the virtual waiting room until such time that the interested item has concluded. Please do not close your browser window while in the waiting room, as a Democratic Services Officer will bring you back into the meeting automatically when it is appropriate. For members attending the meeting in person with a prejudicial interest, they will be asked to leave the chamber for the duration of the interested item and will be invited back into the room as appropriate. If an electronic vote is called during the course of the meeting, then advice on how to participate will be given accordingly to the committee members with voting rights at that time. Thank you. We'll go on to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I know we have received some.
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. Thank you. Thanks, committee. The current list of apologies are from Councillors Campbell, Councillor Morgan and Mr Dutch, the tenant representative.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other apologies? Okay, thank you. No other apologies. We will go on to agenda item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of January 2024. Are people happy to accept the minutes? Councillor Hennessy.
Happy to accept, Chair.
Yeah, happy to accept as well.
And Councillor Hennessy, if you're in the room, please just raise your hand.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so agenda item 3 is declarations of interest. Do we have any? Okay, Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. I have dispensation to talk and vote on matters of housing and homelessness in this meeting, particularly in relation to item 6, page 25. Llamai, who is my employer, are mentioned in terms of advice and mediation. On page 31, the new children's home that Llamai is managing is also mentioned. Also, item 7 in the rapid rehousing update, point 2.14, Llamai's mediation services also mentioned. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lloyd-Selby.
Yes, thank you. In relation to the agenda item on the revenue report, agenda item 4, I have a personal, not a prejudicial interest in relation to service charges relating to telecare and social care. And I have relatives in receipt of both, and I have dispensation to speak on both issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Payne, if you're finished, please press the button. Okay. Councillor Hennessy.
Yes, I have dispensation to speak on the telecare item, but not to vote on it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other declarations of interest? No, we shall move on to the next item then. Item number 4 is the initial budget 2024 to 25 and medium term financial plan 24 to 25 to 28 to 29. Proposals for consultation. If you'd like to come in, thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Would you be able to share my slides, please? Thank you. Okay, and apologies to those of you who've seen these slides a couple of times now. So I think really challenging budget process this year, and I think we are experiencing some particular pressure points as a council, particularly in respect of demand for additional learning needs, some increasing demand and complexity that we're seeing in respect of looked after children, and also in respect of adult social care. And we're also seeing an increase in need and pertinent to this community committee in respect of homelessness, and I think very much reflected as part of an emerging national picture. The November report set out adjusted cost pressures of approximately 21 million against approximately 38 million of unadjusted cost pressures that were originally submitted. And the figures that are included in these draft proposals before you following provisional settlement are very similar, but there is an adjustment to the figure that's included as a cost pressure for homelessness, but it's very slight. Work has been undertaken to assess the ability of directorates to mitigate the unawarded cost pressures. And that's really important because otherwise we will see some of those cost pressures materialising in overspends in 24-25. Committee is asked to note that these current proposals only include 75% of the funding that's estimated to be required as part of the assumed pay awards. So all departments of the council will need to have an inbuilt saving in addition to the 7.8 million that's set out as part of these budget proposals. In setting these proposals, priority in funding has been given to social care, schools and homelessness, and the budget is intended to mitigate issues seen in schools in the 23-24 budget, additional learning needs growth in schools, looked after children growth and increased complexity and growth in adult social care and growth in homelessness, as well as inflationary pressures. The settlement that we received just before Christmas was very much as anticipated, so an increase of 3.1% approximately, which was only £20,000 difference from the figure that was included in the November report. The council tax increase that's modelled in these proposals is 6.7%, and that increase from the figure that was previously modelled has allowed some reduction in savings, such as the removal of the saving that was put forward for supported bus services. Included in these proposals are savings set at a level of 7.8 million, which is an unprecedented level for the council. There is a mix of tactical and transformational savings, and a higher level of savings has been set for discretionary services. It was the intention not to allocate any savings to schools given the difficulties encountered in 23-24, but one small saving has been allocated to the schools budget line, but that's linked to a specific proposal that is intended to result in a reduction in energy costs. And we should note that there are significant pressures in future years across the medium-term period. So, for instance, there is a projected shortfall of 9.4 million in 25-26. So in terms of budget setting and some of the savings that are being implemented, and as part of our investment decisions as well as a council, it's really important that we think about the need to transform. Work is being undertaken by our senior leadership team and across the council to consider what the organisation will need to look like in 2030 and how the organisation can get there. There is far more detail in respect to some of these transformation themes set out in the Reshaping Services budget report that went to Cabinet on the 18th of January alongside the budget report. This budget report also includes proposals to increase fees and charges in the main by 6.7%, which reflects September CPI. There are changes to fees and charges that differ from these proposals, and they are largely either linked to savings proposals or where there are concerns that an increase at this level would lead to unintended consequences. There are linkages made between this budget report and the Life in the Vale survey, and pertinent to this committee are probably a couple of things that were pulled out as part of that report. So the priority to easily accessible care and healthcare services when I and my family need them, but also the priority that was given to being able to buy or rent a good quality home, which was ranked highly as part of the responses to that survey. In terms of the budget planning cycle, I've shared this slide before and illustrates broadly that it's a continuing cycle of budget setting, but I just wanted to draw out some of the steps that have been taken as part of the budget setting process. So directorates submitted cost pressures at the start of September, and this was followed by an initial review by the senior leadership team. In preparation for the budget, there have been 2 rounds of budget working groups, and that's been attended by representatives of finance, human resources, the leader, directors and heads of service for the relevant departments, as well as cabinet members. The first session looked at reviewing and refining cost pressures and discussing initial proposals for transformation. It also looked at how that service area was currently spending their budget. The second budget working group focused on savings proposals and transformation ideas, some of which are included as part of the budget proposals, and some of those transformation ideas will need to be worked up further before they can be put forward with any figures attached to them. There's been further review by SRT and Business Cabinet of savings, and following the receipt of the provisional settlement, there was a further update for Senior Leadership Team and Business Cabinet. This slide just sets out the summary 5-year position, and you can see the increase in funding in 24-25 of 13 million, and that includes some adjustments for reserves. That negative, so minus 56k of use of smoothing reserves reflects a reduction in the drawdown of, in the main, energy reserves, and an increase then of the drawdown of the homelessness reserve to mitigate the homelessness cost pressure. You'll also see cost pressures in 24-25 awarded totalling just short of 21 million, and the resulting 7.8 million gap that will be addressed through savings that are outlined as part of this report. Probably and helpfully for this committee, we have attempted to illustrate the relative protection for services such as learning and skills, schools and social services. It will probably be helpful if we also extended that to general fund housing for the final proposals. Although this cost pressure in that service area has been mitigated by a drawdown from reserves. But what you'll see is, whilst there is a slight reduction in learning and skills, you'll see increases across schools and social services, and a net reduction for the other service areas, illustrating some of that protection that's been attempted to be achieved as part of the budget. There is one cost pressure that's been awarded that's relevant to this scrutiny committee, and that's in respect of homelessness provision. It is stepped down over the period, but there is an error in the figure that was included for 27-28 as part of this report, and it should be minus 460,000, and that will be amended for the final proposals. The intention is that the homelessness pressure is addressed through the rapid rehousing programme, and the use of reserve is stepped down across the period. That will need to be kept under close review to ensure that that is achievable within those timescales. Oh, sorry, just to go back, I did want to pick up at this point that there were a couple of cost pressures that were submitted by this committee that weren't taken forward in respect of community cohesion and antisocial behaviour. And both of those were 40,000, and neither of those were awarded. They were taken out as part of the review of the initial £38 million of cost pressures. In terms of savings proposals, this slide attempts to summarise the broad range of savings proposals that were submitted as part of the £7.8 million overall savings target for 24-25. And as you can see, slightly lower down that page, apologies, it is quite busy, there are a mix of transformational and tactical savings, probably more tactical savings in 24-25, which I think is understandable if we're to be confident that those savings can be delivered. Obviously, some of those transformational savings will take a lot longer to be able to build and implement. There are some savings associated with housing and a saving associated with the shared regulatory service. So the shared regulatory service is in respect of an investor save pest control scheme. And then there are savings in respect of the general fund housing budget. One is in relation to the voluntary assisted tenancies budget, and that was subject to a budget saving in 23-24 as well. And I believe that that is the remainder of that budget. There is also a miscellaneous saving, which is a number of smaller budget adjustments across the general fund housing budget area. I wanted to pick up on use of reserves. I did talk briefly about it, but as part of these proposals, there is intended to be £2.7 million of reserves utilised, and that's mainly from the homelessness reserve and also the energy pressures reserve. The council will need to maintain some risk-based reserves, such as pay pressures, legal reserve and the corporate landlord, and that's particularly required in the context of the reductions we're seeing in service reserves in previous years, but also I think perhaps where in previous years we have experienced underspends as a result of some of the headroom in some of the budgets and vacancies counted in the budget. Obviously, as we take those vacancies out and implement some of the budget proposals that are being put forward, that's less and less likely. We've also established reserves to support transformation. So we've got a risk reshaping and investment reserve and also a digital reshaping reserve, and we have increased these as part of the budget proposals. We are intending to do further review as part of the final proposals. Given the significant unplanned use of reserves for social services in the year, we are looking to set aside some additional sums for social services going into 24-25, given the volatility of some of the placement costs in that area. We're also seeking to set aside some funding for budget risk. I think in 23-24, we achieved about 85% of our savings. If we extrapolate that into 24-25, we need to put aside a sum slightly in excess of £1 million. It might be that given the number of savings proposals that are put forward, that actually the delay in achieving savings, because obviously we're seeking to achieve the full year effect of these savings, is slightly greater than that, but we need to again keep that under review through regular monitoring of the savings proposals. In terms of next steps, so the budget is out for consultation at the moment, including to scrutiny committees. Any comments from scrutiny committees will be fed into the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee, and those comments can be put forward into the final budget on the 29th of February when it's reported to Cabinet and on to Council for the 6th of March to meet that statutory deadline of the 11th of March to set council tax. Happy to take any questions on the budget.
Thank you very much, Gemma. That was very informative. Would anybody like to ask any questions on that? Councillor Hennessy?
The 2.7 million you've allocated out of reserves for the homeless and energy, is that mainly for the cost of the hiring of the hotel in Roos?
Apologies. There is the majority of that cost pressure is associated with ensuring that that provision continues in 24-25.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? No, I can't see anybody else wishing to speak. Okay, thank you very much. With that, the recommendations are that sorry, that the committee views are referred to, sorry. 2 seconds. Apologies for that. I think the air is a bit dry in here. The recommendations are that any views we have are referred for scrutiny at Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee, and for a composite response to be developed and referred back to a special cabinet on the 29th of February 2024. I was just going to bring in Councillor Hennessy, and what would you like to say? Oh, well, yeah, okay, fair enough. There aren't really any views, are there?
No, just to say on that, Chair, if committee haven't got any specific comments to feed back into the consultation process, it would be a matter of just for noting unless members want to raise a comment now, they want to put in the consultation. Yes.
No problems. Councillor Franks?
I'm not a member
just
of the
2 seconds, Councillor Franks, 2 seconds. Are committee happy for me to bring in Councillor Franks? I forgot to ask that first. I don't see any dissent. Councillor Franks.
Thank you very much, colleagues. There is one question. It relates to NOLO. It's a new phrase I've learned. I'm sure everyone else knows it means no one left alone, I think. This was a grant that Welsh Government paid last year and this year, but can I have clarity? Is this housing grant continuing for the next financial year? Thank you.
I'm hoping Mike might have a slightly more helpful response than me.
Okay, Mike, if you'd like to come in.
It's no one left out, councillors. The grant has been reduced this year, and as a result of which has created the cost pressure for bed and breakfast provision, as Gemma described. Initially, in the original draft, Welsh Government draft proposals, the Homeless Prevention Fund, which is where the NOLO element comes from, was originally going to be increased to 5 million, but as a result of obviously the pressures on Welsh Government budgets, that amount was reduced to £2 million for homelessness prevention measures, an element of which we can use for temporary accommodation. Gemma also mentioned the Vale Assisted Tenancy Scheme, which is the council scheme where we provide loans and rents in advance for accessing private rented accommodation. The reason that budget has been reduced in the way described was again as a result of receiving the No One Left Out grant provision, but also a fact that in terms of the council being able to access affordable private rented sector accommodation, that has been greatly reduced this year. I think we will probably be able to expand on that point in the later report this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Franks, are you coming back on that?
If I may, thank you for the explanation. I do think well, it's not for me to advise committee, but I think it would be handy for committee to consider bringing this to the notice of cabinet. It might explain why we're in such difficulties. And I'd like to thank Mike. It was a bit disconcerting hearing him, but having a frozen picture. So there you are. We got the message. So thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lloyd Selby, if you'd like to come in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification from Gemma, if I may. Gemma, am I right in thinking that the settlement Welsh Government received from the UK Government was just 2.1%, and Welsh Government have passed on a 3.1% increase to local government? Is that correct, Gemma?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, thank you. And I would propose that we note the report with thanks to finance officers for the work that they've done to bring the report before us this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd Selby. Okay, so we have had a suggestion from Councillor Franks, who is not on this committee, not a member of this committee, that we pass comments on to Cabinet regarding the NOLO grant. Are committee happy to do that, or shall we ask Councillor Franks to raise this in corporate performance? Oh, Councillor Haynes, you're on mute, I believe. We can't hear you.
Yes, I was on mute. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm happy that we pass on Councillor Franks's suggestions and comments.
Thank you. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm mindful to sort of state that we don't, in terms of Councillor Frank's suggestion. Whilst it's helpful, it's already stated in the report, which no doubt the Cabinet will already need. And if we're going to make a statement such as that, then I think we need to include the recognition that as Councillor Lloyd Selby's just said, recognise that the settlement has been received and the differences, and the added pressures in terms of the quite around 60 to 70% of the pressures are come from education and social services and adult care. So I think I'm mindful that we don't necessarily refer to it, and I'm pretty confident that the Cabinet's already aware and are mindful of the impact that No One Left Out is already, I suppose, it has already been discussed and has already been referenced and considered by the Cabinet when looking at this budget proposal at an earlier stage.
Thank you, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards. Councillor Hennessy.
I was just going to say I'm happy to second Steve Haynes.
Okay.
What we could do, Chair, if things are good,
Councillor Hennessy.
Are we happy to ask Councillor Franks if he would prefer to pass it on to the necessary committee before we vote on it?
I believe that would be a better option, to be honest. Councillor Franks is a member of corporate performance. It might be an idea for him to raise it there. Councillor Franks, are you happy to do that?
Right. I hadn't realised it was such a sensitive matter, but there you are. Well, in all honesty, I would say this is the Housing Scrutiny Committee. This is a major aspect of your work, and I don't know why people are nervous about bringing this to Cabinet's notice. That's what scrutiny is about. So if committee doesn't want to, I'll perhaps find another way to do it. But it does seem a wasted opportunity for tonight. Thank you, colleagues.
Okay, I think the best way to settle this would be to call for a vote. So
We're going to set up a vote.
we're going to set up a vote now. And when it is ready, please vote on whether Councillor Franks's comments will be passed through to Cabinet. And we'll go from there. Thank you.
Yes. Sorry. So committee, just to let you know, it'll be a straightforward yes, no, abstain. So obviously, if you're voting yes, you're voting for that comment or recommendation to go back as part of the consultation onto Cabinet. Obviously, if you don't agree, then you'll be clicking no, and obviously, if you're abstaining, then you click abstain. It should be launched anytime. Right, it should be ready now, committee.
Okay, the votes are in, and unfortunately it's 6-3. That comment will not be passed on to Cabinet through this committee tonight. So I will go back to the original recommendation. As there have been no other views raised, I ask that committee move and note the report. Councillor Hennessy?
Happy to move and note.
Councillor Lloyd-Selby?
Yes, I'd already moved it, so thank you.
Okay. Yes, so committee have agreed to move and note the report, and I will thank Finance for the work on this. Thank you very much. Agenda item 5 is the draft capital programme proposals 2024 to 25 to 28 to 29. Went to Cabinet on the 18th of January. I will bring Gemma back in for this. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you very much. Yep, please. Thank you, Gareth. So there isn't a great deal in terms of the capital bids and proposals that are specifically relevant to this scrutiny committee, but I will briefly kind of outline the overview. Obviously, the majority of the investment in the housing space was picked up as part of the housing improvement programme that was brought before the scrutiny committee in January. And those proposals will be included as part of the final capital proposals at the end of February. We just had a slight timing issue in terms of reflecting them as part of the draft proposals at this stage. So in terms of the provisional settlement that was awarded by Welsh Government, very much broadly in line with the funding that was received in 23-24, there was just an £11,000 decrease from the general capital funding. And that's been assumed to be flatlined across the capital programme period. This slide sets out the summary of the draft capital proposals as they stood on the 18th of January. And of course, those housing proposals reflect the housing improvement plan as they stood at that point in time. just to clarify as well, where we refer to pipeline schemes, that means that they are schemes that are subject to a business case approval. Once a business case has been approved, those schemes will be moved up to the relevant directorate line. So in terms of capital bids were requested to be returned by the 20th of October. In total, 47 bids were submitted. As you can see in 24-25, those bids, the net capital funding required to fund those bids was just short of 18.9 million. And the council had an allocated asset renewal of 366,000 at that point in time. And in 25-26, it had around £1.3 million of unallocated asset renewal. It's obviously significantly less than the required sum. In response to the high risk associated with some of the capital bids that were put forward in respect of ensuring that we had sufficient asset maintenance in schools, care homes, and ensuring that a sufficient level of resurfacing roads was maintained. And because there are a number of schemes in the capital programme that were not progressing because there was insufficient funding allocated to them, or they were contingent on some other external factor, a further review of the capital programme was carried out. A number of schemes, as highlighted on this slide, were removed, although please note that the landmise construction scheme is intended to be added back as part of the final proposals, and that's partly because of the amount of match funding from Welsh Government that scheme would leverage in. There were no bids that were proposed to be funded that are relevant to this scrutiny committee. And then, as I mentioned, the final capital programme will reflect the content of the housing improvement plan as approved by council in January 2024. So these proposals are out to consultation. They will any comments on the consultation we fed into the draft final budget proposals, which were reported to Cabinet on the 29th of February, and then on to Council for this by the 6th of March. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gemma. Does anybody have any questions on that item? Councillor Hanks.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to say I was disappointed to see the new household waste recycling at Landau taken out of the schemes. That is a disappointment. It's been there or thereabout for so many years. I think there is 100,000 to be spent on the road. I don't know if any officers available tonight know if that's due to be spent shortly, please. Thank you.
Go ahead, Gemma.
My understanding is that there are some improvements that are currently being undertaken, but there is some additional provision in the 24-25 programme as well. And that may be, as we've reported previously, on resurfacing due to the timing of when it's helpful to resurface roads. But I don't know that detail, but I can certainly get a bit more information and bring that back to members.
Lovely. Thank you very much. I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hanks. Do we have any other people who wish to speak on this agenda item? Nope, nothing's yet. Okay, so we have no recommendations from this committee. So again, I suggest we move and note the report. Everybody happy with that? Councillor Hennessy?
Yeah, happy to note that.
Okay, Councillor Lloyd-Selby?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Gemma. That was very informative. So you are free to leave if you wish. You are also welcome to stick around and watch the rest of the meeting if you wish. But I think I know what your option's going to be. Enjoy your evening. Thank you for being here. Okay, so agenda item 6 is the proposed corporate strategy for children who need care and support 2024 to 2028. And I believe this will be Mike Ingram.
Good evening. Can I ask if members can hear and see me?
Right, Mike. I think the problem is your audio is working fine, but the screen is freezing. So if obviously the chair and committee are happy, it might be worth just turning your camera off, so we just have the audio. Is that okay for everyone?
I'm certainly happy with that.
Apologies, everyone. And apologies, first of all, on behalf of Rachel Evans, who would ordinarily have been here this evening, but unfortunately can't make the meeting tonight. Regardless, I'm a member of the corporate strategy group, which oversees and has overseen the development of the strategy, but also, as you'll see in the report, part of the group that will monitor the strategy and the action plan going forward. If I can take you through the report. So the proposed strategy, which you have before you, is attached at Appendix 1, and it's our third strategy, the first being endorsed by Cabinet in 2016. The three strategies have evolved from the initial strategy being one that was led by effectively social services, the second one built on those foundations, but also reflected on the cross-sector relationships in relation to the action plan. And finally, the third iteration, which you have before you this evening, hopefully will show a fully integrated model of services meeting the needs of children, young people and their families. The strategy, as I've mentioned, is attached and will take us from this year through to 2028. The report indicates and highlights the fact that children and young people who need care and support are amongst the most vulnerable in our communities, and goes on to talk about how that is reflected in legislation, both in terms of the social services and wellbeing legislation, but also some of the legislation related to education, and also the Healthier Wales document published in June 2018, setting out the system of health and social care and how that is focused. And as I've mentioned, I think what this strategy attempts to do and actually does is to highlight the fact that the work that we do to support our young people and children within our community, we can't do alone, both in terms of statutory sector, but also the important role the third sector play in meeting the needs of a younger people. The report under key issues consideration reflects again on the partnership and the journey of support and opportunities for young people. It focuses on very much a prevention first approach, goes on to talk around how we provide and commission the services that we do, and how we support our families to stay together wherever it's safe and possible to do so, to minimise need for children to become looked after. As I mentioned, there is an action plan attached. This report went in an earlier iteration to the corporate parenting group, and there was some discussion at that meeting regarding the action plan, and hopefully in terms of this report we've reflected our thinking in terms of the action plan, even though it has short, medium and longer term actions within it, but hopefully committee will understand that we will undertake annual review of those actions so that it is a living document, it isn't a strategy that will sit on the shelf, and that as part of the review group, the corporate strategic management group that I mentioned earlier, that we will be able to add and maintain our commitment through new actions or changing actions, bearing in mind some of the conversations that Gemma raised earlier around the significant demands being placed on the council services, particularly in relation to children's services. In reflecting on the demands and challenges, the report also talks around how we better manage our resources, the need to reshape our services, and the way that we integrate and potentially regionalise services as we go forward. And goes on to talk around how do we develop those sustainable, flexible and innovative services, and in doing so, how we develop our staff, our workforce, how we improve our collaboration and co-production work, both, as I mentioned, not within the council and the wider statutory partners, but the important part that our third sector partners play in many of the outcomes for children and young people, but also looking at the value for the scarce resources that we've talked about earlier this evening. Part of the work that we did during the summer was to undertake a series of workshops. Those workshops, there were 3, reflected on the professionals' view, that of parents and carers, and finally a piece of work that was done with children and young people. And I think in reflecting on the engagement that we had through those sessions, the impact of young people and their views resonates throughout the document. Very, very powerful responses from children and young people about their needs. And as I say, hopefully that is reflected in the strategic document itself. The strategy is underpinned by 4 objectives. And as you can see from the report, they are concentrating on supporting families to stay together and very much an early intervention and prevention focus. A second objective around risk and how we manage risk and making sure that the settings are appropriate and that we try as far as possible to avoid children and young people being accommodated unnecessarily. Objective 3 talks around a flexible and affordable mix of services, meeting a diverse range of needs of children and young people. And finally, objective 4 around pathway planning and preventing, achieving care plans and as it says in the report, preventing drift. In turning to the strategy itself, the strategy and those objectives are underpinned and they're highlighted in the strategy itself, are underpinned by a number of principles, and as you can see within the report, that is very much focused on the needs of the person, the child and the young person, but also on the parents, and also reflects on the importance of those collaborative arrangements that I mentioned earlier in the report. Towards the end of the strategy, obviously it goes through the actions. Towards the end of the strategy, they're brought together in one place, and that there's a section right at the end regarding next steps. I've mentioned the action plan and the importance of that and ensuring that it remains a live document. The strategy management group will continue to monitor and review the actions, hold each other to account, and ensure that those actions remain on track. And as I say, that annual review process will allow us and all of the partners to agree additional actions as things change. Finally, perhaps just for Homes and Safe Committee specifically, to draw your attention to some of the actions related to this scrutiny committee. I can take you to objective 1. There is an action there which talks about strengthening connections between the early help and the housing team to develop early intervention and support, going through to objective 3. There is an action there about exploring the need for targeted parent and children support services and accommodation, and that work has commenced already, but as you can see, is a piece of work that may take us some time to deliver, particularly if an accommodation resource is identified as being required. We don't currently have a parent and young person supported housing resource, and of course that reflects the amount of time it might take us to deliver that if the demand is the work that we're doing on demand analysis identifies that as a priority. In Objective 3, under 23, we talk about developing a Seconds Children residential home with Thamai. We have our first residential home, which is in Barry, and clearly we will be looking to identify a second children's residential resource within the community as we move forward. Under Objective 4, there are a couple of actions. The first one is adopt a My First Home model. The My First Home model is, some colleagues may recognise the Housing First model, which is effectively indicating that, you know, accommodation or settled and safe accommodation is a foundation stone to move forward from. We mentioned earlier in the report that many of our young people and children have experienced adverse experiences, and housing being a cornerstone really of doing providing it safe and secure accommodation at the outset, and then obviously potentially working with the young people then to ensure that those wraparound services are then provided, but not being a barrier to providing accommodation in the first instance. We talk about increasing joint funding and improved support for our young homelessness and unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. Again, an important issue, both in terms of accommodation, but also how do we ensure that our housing-related support service, our housing, which is funded through Housing Support Grant, how do we ensure that that is providing the best outcomes for those young people? And also the development then of a pipeline of accommodation projects. That work is ongoing at the moment, together with the Regional Partnership Board, looking at a number of funding streams that are available from Welsh Government, but also looking at the Council's own housing development programme, together with potential ad hoc procurement from settings within the community. 30 talks about the work that we do, part of our preventative work, or Thamai do actually, a commission service to provide youth homelessness support within our school settings. That was an action from the last strategy, which as a result of COVID and the issues that we've had subsequently, that was not able to be provided clearly. Whilst children and young people were homeschooled. But as I say, we do see that as success, the reality of and the issues around housing and aspirations of young people in terms of what they want. I mentioned earlier the impact of the stakeholder group and the feedback from young people. Interestingly, a lot of the young people spoke about the fact that they weren't ready for independent living, the fact that they felt that they would need some additional support as they start their housing journey, and reflecting on the fact that each young person has their own aspirations and ideals, I guess, in terms of what they want. But as I say, the Emphasis project very much providing an overview of what homelessness and housing looks like. I think I'll stop there. Other than to this time, we've developed also an easy read guide, and that easy read guide I think is a useful addition in that it gives you all of the summary information in one place, and opportunities then to explore some of those areas by looking at the fuller strategic document. As I say, Rachel gives her apologies this evening, but I'm quite happy to answer questions if I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have anybody who wishes to speak on this? Councillor Haynes.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mike. Sorry, Chair. Yes, thanks for the report. It was a good report, and I do like an easy read report. And it was good. I've just, one thing just stood out because I didn't understand it. The Corporate Strategy Managing Group. Can you explain that to me, please, what it is?
Mike?
Yes, Councillor Haynes. So that group is a senior officer group. It includes the various heads of service involved in provision of services for children and young people in the council, but also includes senior representatives from health and from third sector. And basically our responsibility, as I say, was to develop the strategy, to assist in the elements of the workshops, and then more importantly, as I say, to monitor the actions that are going to flow from that. We meet quarterly to review the actions, and we've done so probably for the last 2 years, 2 to 3 years, and it's a monitoring method that we adopted for the previous strategy as well.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of Llanmai, but I haven't heard of the other third sector mentioned. I'd have to look it up. Caring for Children, I think it is, or Action for Children. Sorry, I have to look. But with these bodies, I assume Llanmai at least is then employed by the council to provide services for the young people involved. I'm a little concerned that they're sitting on a board that's monitoring their own service that they're providing. I just need some reassurance that there is a break point between them and the service provision.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, you're quite right, Councillor Haynes. A number of the third sector organisations that we work with are directly commissioned, whether that be housing related support or whether that be social services. And there is, outside of the group, there are mechanisms in place to monitor those commissioned services. So it's not like somebody marking their own homework. As I mentioned, the work that we do, we positively challenge each other, obviously, as part of the development of the actions. And the representatives of the third sector are representative of the third sector, not necessarily of their organisation. So, for example, we will work with a significant number of third sector partners. The two that you mentioned, we do work very closely with. But just to reassure members, that is outside of this. In terms of the commission services, there's a very detailed analysis to ensure that the outcomes and outputs of those commission services are delivering what we need independently of this group.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hanks. Oh, no, Councillor Lloyd-Selby, is it? Oh, Councillor Hanks first. Sorry, she has been waiting longer. Yes, come on in.
Thank you, Chair. I just was going to say I thought it was a really thought-provoking and interesting report to read, and thank you for that. And I just wondered how confident you are with Objective 3 to provide and commission a flexible, affordable and mix of high-quality service with our budgets as they are. I just wondered if you could give some reassurance, please. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mike. Oh, may have frozen.
Mike, can you hear us? Sorry, your camera's frozen. Are you able
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I
Yes,
can hear
we
you
can
now.
hear you now.
Oh, apologies. We do already provide a range of accommodation support services, whether that be some of our direct access type services that are funded through our housing support programme. But what we acknowledge is that we've got an opportunity using the council's own housing development programme to be able to be a bit more innovative in terms of the type of accommodation, the support provision that we have. So it is about utilising resources that we have. Gemma mentioned earlier our capital programme in terms of the housing development programme. And it's also about levering in some of the additional capital capacity from others. So, for example, I mentioned earlier in the discussion, in the past, we've been able to receive integrated capital funding from the Regional Partnership Board, which is a Welsh Government grant that's passed to health boards to administer and distribute. And that has morphed into something called HCF. And again, we've got projects already in the pipeline, or Rachel certainly has projects already in the pipeline that are either at the business planning stage, business case stage, or we are actively looking for alternative accommodation at the moment. So resources is clearly always going to be an issue and priorities. But just to say, in this space, we are working collaboratively, both in terms of working with social services and with health provision. And there will be a range of provisions in the next 18 months that will provide additional flexibility and innovation in terms of the accommodations services that we provide to children and young people. Hopefully that reassures you, Councillor Hanks.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you, Chair.
No problem. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Yeah, it's just a question, Mike, and it follows on from Councillor Hank's question in terms of assurances or a commitment to sort of give more detail around Objective 4 on page 26. It says better housing options and housing support for children and young people. Taking into consideration the nature of the discussion that we've just been through in terms of cost pressures and difficult decisions being made, could you expand on options and what that will mean in reality in the next year or so? And secondly, would it be fair to state that whilst you acknowledge the highest proportion of looked after children are part of kinship caring, that my understanding is that until central government changes its welfare system and gives equal rights to kinship carers, then that could still be a struggle or a factor to consider going forward in terms of the number of people coming forward to act as kinship carers. Thank you.
Mike?
Thank you for that. If I take your first question, so we anecdotally we're aware of young people who the council will rehouse. They move into independent living either through choice, usually through choice. A lot of young people choose to wish to live independently. But what we also find is that there are pitfalls associated with that, and we have had experience of younger people perhaps losing accommodation or difficulties in managing that accommodation. And part of this action is around recognising that may be appropriate for some. Some will need additional levels of support in order to maintain their tenancies. Because ultimately, we would want all young people to be able to maintain their accommodation. But what we recognise at the moment is that we don't have enough supported housing for those young people who need the additional support or choose to want to live for a little bit longer in that supported environment based on their lived experiences. And it's that supported housing element is the element that we're looking to increase, either within a community-based setting or through development of new housing. So we are, as I say, there is a pipeline that Rachel and ourselves and colleagues are working on from Health. I think it probably will be useful at some stage in the future to bring a report to this committee showing you what that pipeline looks like and the types of options that we're looking to take forward. And perhaps that will give you the necessary reassurance in terms of both sufficiency and deliverability of that pipeline of work. And I'm sure we'd be happy to bring that back to committee at some stage in the future. In relation to your second question, I also sit on the corporate parenting panel as an officer representative, and you know the points that you make are acknowledged. The numbers that are reflected in this report, but also the more recent figures that we've seen at corporate parenting panel in terms of pressures, not only in terms of foster care arrangements, but also, as you say, in terms of kinship arrangements, are acknowledged there and have been discussed by members who sit on the corporate parenting panel. But there is a reflection that there are pressures, extreme pressures within the system. And I think they're reflected, obviously, in terms of, again, the financial discussions that we had earlier around the additional budget requirements for colleagues in particularly children's services.
Thank you, Mike. Anybody else? No. Okay, yeah. Oh, Councillor Lloyd Selby, you had your hand up earlier, but you've taken it down. Are you still wishing to speak? Come on in then, Councillor.
No, thank you. Mike has already addressed the issue that I was going to ask a question about. Thank you, Chair.
No problem. Thank you. Are there any others wishing to speak after that? Not that I can see, nothing in the room. Okay, so the recommendations are that the committee notes the progress made in developing a new 4-year strategy and action plan for children who need care and support. Are we happy to accept that recommendation, Councillor Hennessy?
Yeah, happy to note it.
Okay. And the second is that we consider the proposed strategy and the associated action plan and provide feedback and comments to inform the development of a final draft of the strategy for approval by Cabinet. Councillor Hennessy, I know what you're going to say, I think.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Okay. Mark?
Just to check on that, Chair, because I don't believe there was any specific feedback. But I'll just double check with the committee. If there's not, then obviously we'll just note the report.
I was just about to do that, Mark. You read my mind. Do committee have any specific feedback or comments they would like to send back? Councillor Hennessy, you've not got anything? No? Okay, I don't see anything. So yes, we will be going with the 2 recommendations. Thank you. Agenda item 7 is the homelessness and rapid rehousing plan update. I believe Nick is taking that.
Thank you, Chair. Just to check really that people can hear and see me.
We can hear and see you clearly.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. Okay, and in terms of this report aims to highlight the continuing service pressures relating to homelessness and also the steps being taken to reduce the use of temporary accommodation. These steps are being taken in line with our rapid rehousing plan, which was discussed several months ago, really. So briefly, and by way of context, really, the no-low approach as mentioned earlier, the no one left out approach, and that was adopted by Welsh Government back around the time of COVID, and that resulted in a dramatic increase in the number of people being placed in temporary accommodation. Prior to the single people mainly, unless they were deemed to be specifically vulnerable, were not prioritised for temporary accommodation. So the no-low approach then was later underpinned by legislation. So it's enshrined in law now, and councils are legally obliged to provide temporary accommodation for a lot more people than was previously the case. This council, like many others across Wales, needed to in response to that, make sure we had sufficient accommodation available, and the accommodation that was most readily available at very short notice was hotel accommodation. Initially, that was funded by Welsh Government via the no-low grant, but that funding has been reduced over time, with the cost burden being returning to the council. The rapid rehousing plan was therefore put in place to reduce the use of temporary accommodation and also the cost pressures being experienced by the council in terms of providing that accommodation. So moving on to some of the key issues, the key challenges that we're experiencing at the moment in respect of homelessness. There are record numbers of people seeking our help in respect of homelessness. There's also very high numbers in temporary accommodation. There's been a 195% increase in the numbers in temporary accommodation to prior to COVID, and also huge costs that go with that. Partly as a legacy of no-low, with the increased responsibilities for more people, but also changes to the housing market that have happened around the same time. And I mean specifically high property prices, high interest rates, which have made it more and more difficult for first-time buyers and others to get onto the property ladder. So home ownership has been challenging. But in terms of private rented sector, where we've seen increased private rents, and we've also seen a shrinking of the supply in the private rented sector, pushing more and more people towards social housing. And lastly, I guess, is resettlement pressures, with people from Ukraine, Afghanistan via resettlement programs arriving in the Vale of Glamorgan and primarily accessing private rented sector stock, still putting pressures on the local housing market. So we've been successful in terms of moving people on, and since over the last 12 months of using the hotel, is 176 people have moved on during that time. However, that number has been offset by the high levels of presentation. So as soon as we're able to move people on, those rooms and those spaces are backfilled by other households. So really, really challenging environment for the housing solutions team who deal with this on a day-to-day basis. So moving now to the rapid rehousing plan, there are a number of key priorities identified in the plan. So I'll run through each of those in a little bit of detail, just to give you a bit of a flavour of what we've been doing and the progress to date, really. And firstly, prevention. Prevention is better than cure. And the further we're able to prevent homelessness and resolve the issue, the further upstream, the better, really. So Mike mentioned earlier the work taking place in schools in terms of mediation and working with young people to identify the issues and try and head things off at the pass. That's been particularly effective, but also things like targeted support and family mediation as well. Just making sure that people don't end up in a situation, and young people as well, where they're at risk of being made homeless. So that work is ongoing. But there's also been where people do find themselves served with a notice or asked to leave by a family member, we carry out prevention work. We try to undertake prevention work at that stage as well. We've introduced over the last few months a triage service within the homelessness team, where people are prioritised and dedicated support workers and officers are available to see individuals at very short notice to try and start the work early on, try and step in to mediate problems, provide advice, and try and avoid people being made homeless. We're also able, what we tend to do as well is link with landlords where private landlords are serving notice, link with them to find out if we can salvage that relationship. I'm talking about things like sometimes offsetting arrears or making contributions to if there's been damage to property, etc., because it's more cost effective to spend money to prevent homeless because the cost of providing temporary accommodation and how long people spend in temporary accommodation stacks up very, very quickly. It is difficult, however, to put as much resource as we would like into prevention because the pressures on the service, whilst there's lots of homeless people and people are being made homeless today and tomorrow, there's a need to provide to find accommodation for those people. You know, in an ideal world, you'd be spending a lot of time on prevention. However, when the day-to-day pressures are so high, understandably, we're having to prioritise services to what's most immediate in terms of need. The other point, or the final point to make in relation to prevention, really, is that it's proven increasingly difficult to prevent people becoming homeless. And when we're talking about private landlords, sometimes landlords have made up their mind that they want to sell properties. So, you know, we can't really persuade them otherwise. And also in terms of the rent, increase in interest rates and costs that landlords are experiencing, they find it unviable to deliver the accommodation at the current cost. So the new rents that they're proposing very often are several £100s a month more expensive, and it's not financially viable for us to top that up on a long-term basis. So prevention is more and more challenging, really. And a number of years ago, we were preventing about 75% people from becoming homeless. At the moment, our current performance is around 50%. So every other household we're able to prevent. Moving on to the next section of the plan is in relation to increasing the supply of accommodation. And that's the best, most sustainable, most appropriate long-term solution to tackling homelessness, build more homes. The Vale has benefited from just over £10 million in social housing grant over the last year. That's quite a significant increase from that level a number of years ago, where we were looking at a figure of around 4 million. So a lot more money we're getting to build houses. And as well, we've been able to benefit from slippage money. That's funding that's available where other councils across Wales haven't been able to spend the money because of last minute delays or sites not coming forward or planning issues, etc. Where we've got schemes which are oven ready, forward funded in some cases, we can actually take advantage of that slippage funding. And last year we levered in an extra £2 million, which all goes towards building additional homes. So the social housing grant programme supports the council's own house building programme, but also the RSL's programmes in terms of building houses of the local housing associations. Our programme itself has delivered already 90 additional council houses, and there's an additional 226 under construction at this point in time. Over the next 10 years, the new build programme's gearing up at scale and pace, really, and the business plan is set to deliver an additional 939 new council homes. So real sort of high numbers there. And after that, 150 properties per year for the 10 years after from 2036. So really ramping up at pace and scale. And some of that is being facilitated by the council's development partnership with Cardiff, where we're able to build larger schemes at short notice with minimum lead-in times and really benefiting from some of the economies of scale, really, from working with a large council like Cardiff. Lastly, in terms of new build, I mentioned social housing grant, but the other way we were able to deliver new affordable housing is via the Section 106 agreements, really. And whilst there's been a lot of development activity in the Vale, that's also generated additional affordable housing, because typically 30 to 40% of a private new build estate has got to be affordable housing. So effectively, the market sale funds the affordable housing element of that. So our RSL partners are able to buy into that and make homes available which are let via the council's allocation scheme. Moving on next to the purchase of existing properties, and that's another way that we can increase the supply of social housing. And the benefit of that is that we are able to do that with a very short leading time. A number of properties have been considered and are being considered. The Olive Lodge is one example on Port Road, former B&B, which has been purchased to be used for temporary accommodation. We're also in the process of buying back 3 former council homes, which are sold under right to buy, which are on the market at the moment, which we can make available for council housing. And there's a pot of funding called TACP, Transitional Accommodation Capital Programme, which is there to support councils to buy back properties and bring additional properties into use. And we've benefited over the last year by securing £2.3 million worth of additional grant income, which has been used to fund the 3 council homes, but also 20 additional housing association properties, which are being brought forward on our behalf. And the last point to mention is we're sort of looking at other opportunities for purchasing of existing properties, and discussions underway with the MOD to purchase additional properties that are surplus to MOD requirements to bring back into use for social housing and let via the housing allocations scheme. We're in the process of tweaking the council's property acquisitions policy at the moment, and the report's due to come back to Cabinet quite soon, where we're adjusting the parameters there and the viability assumptions to make it feasible to buy more properties, really, so we can increase what we're doing in terms of buyback. Then moving on to modular development on mean wall sites, the main benefits of these sorts of developments, again, the short lead-in time on construction, but also the flexibility and the fact that the units can be moved to different sites and relocated across the Vale of Glamorgan. The Court Road Civic Amenity site was worked really well, and we've got a large scheme at Eagleswell, at the former Eagleswell School site in Llantwit Major at the moment, which is nearing completion, hopefully in the next few months, which is going to deliver an additional 90 units. So really big numbers there. The existing buildings are also being considered for conversion. A former office building in Cadoxton in Barry is one example, but we're also looking at to start a pilot exercise shortly where we're looking to convert existing council homes into 1-bedroom accommodation for people, because that's the main need at the moment. The bulk of people in temporary accommodation are single people, so making former family homes to available to single people. We're able to sort of house 3 or 4 people in what would have been a 3-bedroom house where one family would have been housed previously. So it helps in terms of supporting the needs of single people, and the pilot exercise will enable us to do a bit of an evaluation and to determine if that's something we can build on to increase the supply for single people going forward. The private rented sector continues to play a key role, and protecting and sustaining private rented tenancies relieves pressure on social housing. We work very closely with a number of investor landlords locally, and really good agreements in place. They do raise viability concerns sometimes in relation to their mortgage costs and the cost of managing and maintaining properties. So we need to work quite closely with them to support them to continue to make those homes available. And it is a challenge for some of those landlords at the moment. The council has also developed its own in-house homeless leasing scheme. This was on the back of the previous Catrevi Havard scheme, which is being wound down, and we've established and set that up within the council now and protected an additional 20 units of accommodation for homeless people. So we're continuing to be able to access and utilise that accommodation. And we're also looking at the prospect of a different leasing scheme, really, a longer term leasing scheme, which is Leasing Scheme Wales, where other councils have set up longer term leasing schemes to increase the supply of accommodation. So we're looking at marketing that to local property owners as another sort of option, really. So I think if private landlords have got a menu of different options which may appeal to them, it just means that we're able, hopefully, to ensure that we're able to access that accommodation for people who are threatened with homelessness or indeed who are homeless. So moving on, the next part relates to the allocations policy and the way council housing is allocated. And the rapid rehousing plan aims to ensure that significant proportions of people who are helped are homeless people. And at the moment, we're doing very well with this, with excluding sheltered age designated accommodation. 75% of our homes are let to homeless households, which is what you would expect, I guess. There is scope to improve on that and to expand that as well by looking at the local lettings policies in particular, and possibly the age designations. And some of the staff have been out on the road speaking to community councils, making them aware of the homeless challenges and pressures, and also seeking their support, really, to flex some of the local lettings policies to make sure that those people in greatest need are prioritised for accommodation. And the discussions have really been supportive and encouraging so far. So that potentially can give us some opportunity to house even more homeless people into longer term accommodation. So those are the kind of the key measures in the rapid rehousing plan. The report does cover, there's a section in the report which talks specifically in relation to the interim position about hotels. And as I said earlier, whilst we've been successful in moving on a lot of people, 176, I think it was, occupancy rates in the hotel remain high, and we do need that accommodation in the short term. We continue to need that. So we're discussing the forward block booking for the next financial year, so from April 24 through to March 25 at the moment. So hopefully we'll be able to reach agreement with the hotel regarding that. The report ends by flagging up future actions and priorities, and they include continuing to look at buying back of properties where we're able to, and increasing the supply at very short notice. It talks about increasing or purchasing more land and larger pieces of land where we're able to for housing development. So we're actively looking at sites at the moment, and different sites and any sites that are available. If we're able to purchase those sites, either ourselves directly or via one of our RSL partners, that will continue to give us potential to build new homes. Conversion, it will be a continuing theme, really, where we're looking where maybe there's potential to convert existing buildings, and the pilot I mentioned of the family homes. But there's also a need for us to look at contingency plans as well. If there are increases in the numbers of people coming through, or if we're not able to secure the rooms that we feel we need in hotels, to look at some other opportunities. And other councils are in this boat, so there's a potential for us to explore learning from other neighbouring authorities, really, and things that we could potentially consider and do in the Vale of Glamorgan if we need to. And lastly, I suppose it's about protecting the relationships with the private landlords, and about supporting them and ensuring it's viable and maintaining those relationships and cementing tied landlords in if we're able to for periods of time, so that we can protect our own access to accommodation, really. So by way of ending, hopefully that report and the verbal sort of update gave a comprehensive overview in terms of the challenges, but also what we're doing at the moment. But it also highlights the progress that we're making, because there is a lot being achieved. There's a lot more to be done, but there's lots of ideas and there's lots of things in the pipeline. So hopefully, some of those measures can really kick in and reduce our reliance on temporary accommodation, because financially it's not great, but also it's not a great experience for the households and the families who are living in temporary accommodation. We really need to house people into longer term, more secure accommodation as early as we can, which is the whole point really of the rapid rehousing plan. So I've talked a lot there, so it's probably an appropriate point to pause, Chair, if that's okay, but I'd be happy to sort of try and answer any questions if people have them.
Sorry, Councillor Hennessy, you've had your hand up in the chamber for a little while, so I'll bring you in first.
Hiya, Nick. I have two questions for you. Can you tell me how long, on average, people are staying at the hotel? And same question, what's the makeup of the homeless between families and single people?
Okay, thanks, Councillor Hennessy. In terms of waiting time at the hotel, it does differ quite markedly between single people and families. There are a small number of families accommodated at the moment, and that has been the case for several months. But those families will typically move on between around three to 5 months for a family. Single people is a lot longer. This is because of the shortage of a single person's accommodation, but also the number of single people. So single people can be waiting 16 months or more in some instances for accommodation. The split between, I'm assuming you mean at the hotel, but out of if we had 75 rooms being used at the hotel, there would probably be around 6 to 8 families at any one point in time, with the remainder being single people.
Sorry, forgot to press the button. I wasn't going to mention this, but you brought up the olive. I don't know the exact figure. The council paid over £500,000 for it. Can you let this committee know how long it's going to take to renovate this old hotel, or bed and breakfast, whatever it was, sorry, and what it's going to cost, if you have those figures?
Nick, are you able to come back in on that?
Well, sorry, Chair, I didn't press my microphone button there, but I was just going to say we have indeed, Councillor Hennessy, purchased the olives and have it's been in our ownership for some time. Work is due to start shortly. It might have actually already have started. I haven't been past over the last few days, but its work is due to begin imminently. I believe the work on site is expected to take around 12 months. In terms of the cost of the work, I'd have to get back to you. That's not information I've got available at my fingertips at the moment. But prior to any development, we carry out a viability assessment, which takes into account the cost of the purchase, the cost of bringing the property up to standard, etc. And there's a break-even period. So we factor in the rental income that we expect to get and various other assumptions to make sure that the development's viable over a period of time. So we don't purchase properties if we don't believe they're viable to bring them back into use over a period of time.
Thank you, Nick. Councillor Payne.
Right, there I am. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Nick. It's just really to stress the point about, homelessness is a very complex issue. When you consider that there are 11,000 people in temporary accommodation across Wales. The Vale of Glamorgan Council performs very well. I see it in practice when I look at how many young people now have gone into some of the new developments like the Castle View project, the Sea View project, Subway Road, and now the new accommodation on the East Quay. Also, I think with our new developments, particularly I welcome the development on Colbrook Road in terms of that will take 120 at capacity people off the housing list and off the TA list as well. But one of the things I was interested in is about the housing duty, about the kind of issues there are with people that are presenting as homeless. That's one of the things. And also people who can register for Homes for You, because I don't know if people are aware, people can register for Homes for You. It doesn't mean they're going to get housed. You know, out of area people can register. So I'm interested in those two things in terms of rapid rehousing, really. But maybe that's not an answer for now. Maybe that's an answer, or maybe for future committee meetings. But I just wanted to say it's very complex. There is lots of things that the Supporting People team do, you know, Homes for You, housing solutions, you know, it's a multifaceted thing. And, you know, the teams are doing well and they are providing solutions, and it is moving and people are getting rehoused. So it's kind of a well done from me, really.
Nick?
Thank you, Councillor Payne. That's really sort of nice to hear that feedback, and I can certainly share that with the team, because it is a very challenging environment for the team, because ultimately they want to help people. They want to help everybody and they want to help people straight away, and sometimes that's not always possible, or people can get frustrated because they can't get exactly what they want or exactly when they want to. You're right to draw attention to some of the schemes that you mentioned there, because that's been such a huge difference, really. We've been able to move on significant numbers of people into some of those pub conversion schemes and the other housing developments that you mentioned. I'd also agree that homelessness is very complex. The reasons for homelessness and the support needs that people have are varied and extensive. So, you know, a real vulnerable cohort of people who need assistance. The Homes for You scheme, obviously, is the way that homes get allocated, and does attract lots of discussion and lots of attention as well, because effectively it's trying to ration out a scarce resource. So the people who are able to secure accommodation think the scheme is great, but there's more people who don't get accommodation, who perhaps get frustrated with Homes for You, or perceive that it's not fair or it's not working in their favour. It's not an ideal allocation scheme, because more people don't get housed than get housed. There's 6,200 people on the list at the moment, and you know, large numbers of those are in the highest priority need bands of people in real acute housing need. You mentioned specifically people with a local connection. You know, we do require people to have a local connection. People without a local connection can be considered. There are, however, sometimes that their priority will be reduced preference, so they will not have as higher preference as others. There are exceptions to this, so people fleeing domestic abuse, etc. And there are plans. I remember at the committee meeting before last, where we talked about the white paper, where that may change in future. But for the time being, we're still operating under the local connection criteria.
Councillor Lloyd-Selby.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nick, for taking us through the report so comprehensively. So one of the things that stood out for me is that there are 15.6% of households in the Vale that are living in privately let accommodation, and rents for private lets went up by 12%, I think, in the last year. So that obviously is bringing some pressure to bear in terms of you know, people who are struggling with affordability, and also, as you've already mentioned, some of the reasons why people are finding themselves in difficulty and homelessness. And obviously the report also highlights the fact that there are no private lets available for the local housing allowance rate. And that's the case across Wales, isn't it? I think Bevan Foundation did a report in the last couple of months that said there was a tiny number of houses in Wales that were available for within that allowance rate. So just, I think it's important to acknowledge that falls outside our ability to do anything about that. We can't influence what those rates are. But what's the route for us as a local authority raising concerns about the clear need for the DWP to raise local housing allowance. So that's my first question. And secondly, I'm interested that the report highlights, and you've referenced, the steps the council is taking to buy back properties. And what are the benefits to the council of buying back previously purchased council houses as opposed, for example, to buying on the open market? Thanks.
Go ahead, Nick.
Thank you for that. Yeah, the local housing allowance rates, by way of lobbying that, the sector, Welsh Local Government Association and Community Housing Cymru, or the umbrella group for housing association, have lobbied hard and raised this, and I think Welsh Government have raised this with the UK government in the past. So we'll see what happens, I expect, in future with that. But it's affordability of private rental properties is likely to continue to be a challenge for the short and medium term at the minimum, really. The second point you made in relation to the buyback of former council houses, the main benefit of buying former council houses is that the space standards and the construction standards are comparable to what we would need them to be in terms of WHQS 23. We know that the properties are solid properties, and the space standards are suitable and appropriate, so they shouldn't need, in most cases, huge amounts of remedial work. The other benefit is they're in areas where we already own homes, on housing estates, and sometimes flats in blocks where we already own flats. So it brings the management together. So in the past, where there's been challenges amongst managing blocks of flats, whether it be in 75% council properties and 25% private rentals, if they were all council properties and all council tenants, that would make the management of that block and those tenancies, it'd bring them into line, make them consistent, and it'd make it a lot easier as well. So those would be the main benefits, I'd say.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And if I may just respond to that, Chair. So thank you for that clarification. And I would hope that the committee will feed back to Cabinet that we want to continue to do all we can to lend our voice to amplify calls for the UK government to increase local housing allowance rate to a more reasonable level. And also, I think it's important that we just refer anyone who's struggling in terms of meeting the costs of their accommodation to the advice and support that's available for them. I would reference the facilities at Pobble One Stop Shop on Houghton Road, if anyone isn't aware of that. People can call in and receive advice and support about maximising their income, but also if they are at risk of losing their tenancy, as Nick has already mentioned, that there is support available to them that might enable them to continue, to retain their current accommodation. There's a new multi-agency pod at Golau, Caredig as well. And obviously the council's also available to offer advice and support. I think it's important we do all we can to raise awareness of that for anybody that's struggling. Thank you.
Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Sorry, Vice Chair, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards, you did have your hand up.
You got me on now?
Yeah, you're on now.
Sorry, my fault, I pressed the wrong button. I just wanted to echo the comments already made by fellow councillors, Nick, in terms of thank you for such a comprehensive report. What I can see is an honest assessment of where we are and the challenges that we still face. Not just in terms of the service pressures, but as us as a community and as a wider society. So thank you for that. There's just a couple of points I wanted to make, and that is at page 4, 2.15, and again at page 5, 2.16 and 7, you reference that in the past staff have been able to prevent over 70% of tenants losing their tenancy, but that's now dropped to 50%. And I was just wondering, following on from Councillor Lloyd Selby's comments and valid points in terms of the increase in rent and from private landlords, are we starting to see, is there any evidence that we're seeing a picture of landlords resisting any approaches from us as an authority to try and prevent them repossessing or instigating the legislation to remove those tenants? If so, are there any particular landlords that perhaps, let's just say, have a pattern of behaviour in that regard and are less tolerant as they previously were, that perhaps we need to consider? And I just wanted to reference as well in terms of I suppose it's the conversion of at 2.28, the conversion of existing properties. You state that there's a pilot exercise, and it would be useful, I think, for this committee if I'm sure that if this is on the agenda anyway, that we receive a report, because this is where the council is really looking at innovative ways in which to tackle homelessness. And I'm just really interested in this pilot exercise. So any further information or report on that would be most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards. In terms of prevention, as I said, it is tricky, and it is trickier now than it was, and that's reflected in our stats. In terms of a pattern between private landlords, I don't think so. Each landlord's circumstances are different in terms of their financial position, when their loans are due to expire or be remortgaged, and how much equity they've got in properties, etc. Generally, landlords engage with us and have a conversation. Sometimes it's possible to salvage things and protect that existing tenancy. Other times there's too much water under the bridge, and the landlord may have lost patience or sympathy and has had enough and really wants the property back. So we do tend to sort of work on a case-by-case basis. I think most of the landlords, well, all the partner landlords we work with, we would describe as sort of ethical, responsible landlords. We don't work with people that who don't share our values, but financially driven really. There was a private landlords forum recently, really, and a lot of conversation at that forum regarding about it no longer being viable for some landlords. It might be landlords with smaller stockholders. Sometimes if people have got larger stock portfolios and have been in the game a longer time and have more equity in properties, then they're more insulated from changes in the market, interest rates, etc. And others are more exposed. So we have those conversations and try and agree support or packages of assistance or things that we can do on a case-by-case basis, really, rather than a blanket approach. But very much is in our thought, really, it's where we can, it's cheaper to be able to sort of step in and intervene to protect and save a tenancy than it is to put somebody in a bed and breakfast accommodation, especially if they could be there for 12 months or more if they're a single person. So it is spending money to save money, really, where we can. Regarding the shared accommodation pilot, happy to sort of come back with more information in future as we go along. It is going to be sort of operated on a very small scale to begin with, because there are clear challenges with that, and especially around the management of houses in multiple occupation effectively. So in terms of the way we allocate rooms in homes, the mixes of people, mitigating risks, etc. There's a lot to think about, but it's essentially what the private landlords are already doing on our behalf. So we're confident with the right sort of mitigations and the correct management in place that we can make a success of it. But it's happy to sort of report back and share learning and give some feedback regarding that project as it progresses.
Thank you, Nick. Mike, I can see you're wanting to come in.
Thank you. It was just picking up on some of the points that have been raised this evening. Clearly, a lot of the issues are outside of the council's control, and it's a sort of storm of issues really all coming together very much at the same time. I was just going to reflect. We've had a discussion there in relation to the private rented sector. And over the last 10 years, from a very low base, there was very little in the way of private rented housing actually in the Vale. And that has grown subsequently. And of course, we're seeing issues that are now affecting landlords and landlords exiting the market. It's just really it's part of the solution, but ultimately there is a supply issue. And unfortunately, utilising PRS, buybacks and whatever, it is part of an immediate response to the emergency situation that we find ourselves in, but it doesn't add to the supply. So it's just to reflect that access into private renting is part of the solution. The only other point to the debate that we were talking about then around pressures coming down the line, we all will have seen that a lot of owner occupiers will be facing the end of their fixed term mortgage rates that they've had, which they would have had at very low levels of mortgage interest when they took out those policies, and those fixed terms coming to an end. And there's a lot of debate and discussion at the moment around mortgage rescue, because clearly, whilst the mortgage sector, the banking sector, agreed with the UK government at the time to sort of hold in abeyance any recovery actions, I guess, in relation to default. Clearly, as mortgage interest rates are now as interest rates are starting to decline, clearly we may see an emergence of other groups coming to the local authority for assistance. But just to say that there is work going on at the moment between local authorities, and I know Welsh Government are currently looking at this as an opportunity.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Hanks, thank you for your patience. Councillor Hanks, are you still wanting to come in?
Sorry, forgot to press my big button. Nick, just wanted, and Mike as well, to thank you as well for all the work you've done. Excellent work in challenging times. And I was going to wondered if committee were happy to have I see there's an emphasis project, and we haven't had a presentation from Lamu for a very, very long time. And I wondered if this was something that could be considered along with Councillor Lovelock Edwards's shared accommodation project. I think they would be really interesting. So thank you.
Go ahead, Mike, if you'd like to come in on that. Mike, we can't hear you and your picture seems to have frozen again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Yes, I haven't got a problem with that, and Mark and I will discuss adding that to your forward programme.
Thank you, Mike. Does anybody else have any comments or questions they would like to make? No? Okay, so the recommendations for that item are that committee considers the current service pressures arising from homelessness and the progress made implementing the rapid rehousing plan. Are we happy to go with that recommendation, Councillor Hennessy?
Yeah, happy to go with that recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And the second is that committee note the steps being taken to reduce the use of temporary accommodation.
Happy to go with that recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Mark?
Sorry, Chair, just also, there were comments that were made, I think, by Councillor Lloyd Selby about the local housing support. To go back to Cabinet, I believe, and also we've had requests about additional reporting on the work with Landmai and obviously the other work on the pilot project. I don't know if Chair and Committee are happy to move those as well as recommendations.
I would be happy with that. Councillor Hennessy?
Yeah, happy to move all of them.
You're so quick on that button.
I know.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I just want to say thank you to all the officers for their hard work in preparing the papers and their reports tonight. I have no items which are urgent, and so I will say to you, thank you all for your time. Go home, enjoy your evening, and the next meeting is the 4th of March. Thank you. Goodbye.